So the other big story today is the state capture inquiry starts at 10 o'clock in Parktown, Johannesburg. And yesterday, the inquiry has heard of how E.M.L Energy failed to honor its jet fuel supply agreement with SAA. That's according to the evidence by SAA head of fuel management, Vaughan, who testified yesterday. The commission also heard evidence relating to irregularities involving E.M.L fuel supply agreement with SAA Express. Let's get more on this story now. And our reporter, Mbalenhle Mthethwa, has been covering the story for us. Mbalenhle, thank you very much indeed for coming through. So what have we learnt about E.M.L, this company there, and its relationship with both SAA and SAA Express?
So what we know about E.M.L is that it's a small entity that was basically contracted to provide jet fuel for these airlines. And we heard that, you know, this decision came from, a decision basically to sign this agreement with the small player came from a board decision which was done in 2016 where the board resolved to try and push for transformation and to try and just remove some of the barriers to entries for smaller players. And then the decision was that they would then allocate 15% of their fuel procurement to smaller players, and then the bulk of it would go to, you know, your major oil producers. So that's how it came into the fore. And now we heard from evidence from the head of fuel management, the head of management, my apologies, but from this SAA employee who basically testified that they have failed to honor this agreement that they had from last year, and they basically supplied SAA with fuel for literally 2 weeks, and he says it's literally 15 days within the first month of their contract, and they haven't really supplied them with fuel ever since.
And when is that contract expiring?
The contract is expiring next month, is due to expire next month, and they obviously haven't been honoring that contract, and they have not. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that SAA is losing any money at this stage, because they are supposed to basically deliver. They only pay for what is delivered to them. And he obviously explained to the commission that, you know, SAA has not really suffered any losses because of that, but also they also try to hedge their risks. They also try to protect themselves against these kind of risks by basically getting multiple suppliers to supply them with fuel. So the act has not really impacted on SAA, you know, operations. However, you know, it is interesting to hear that after a decision to involve smaller players, this particular company, E.M.L, has not been able to honor that agreement.
Yeah, but correct me if I'm wrong, by procuring from a smaller player as opposed to a major oil producer, SAA would have lost or paid more in that regard.
So that's what we get from the witness. He basically explains to the commission that, you know, because they are a small player and they still have to go back to the major oil producers to procure their oil, and they'll obviously have to, you know, factor in a few of their costs and also add in a profit that will obviously mean that, you know, SAA will pay slightly more than they would. And obviously, because they're a smaller player, they wouldn't be procuring in huge bulks like economies of scale. So they would not be due to, you know, getting those big discounts that, you know, bigger players would probably be able to get because, you know, they're procuring in larger portions.
Similar situation with SAA Express?
With SAA Express, we heard about how basically, we heard about a quotation. The quotation was basically for something around over 800 million litres. And we hear the witness basically explaining to the commission that, you know, the numbers don't tally with what they were originally confined to procure, to supply to SAA Express. And it's almost as though the quotation included litres that they would have probably gotten. So SAA Express was getting fuel from SAA at other filling stations, I'm sorry, rather not filling stations, airports, where they would stop over to fill their aircrafts. They only had this agreement and arrangement with E.M.L for Pilanesberg. But it's almost as though in the quotation they've also included areas that are supplied by SAA, and that's the irregularities. And she's just saying that, you know, these numbers just don't corroborate. Right.
So today is going to be very interesting. We have the former CEO of SAA, Sizakele Mzimela, taking the hot seat, so to speak. What can we expect?
So there are two things that have come out with in relations to testimony relating to SAA. We've heard about the 15 billion rand consolidation loan, which was riddled with a lot of irregularities, and that was flagged as an act of corruption,
right.
you know. And we also had a whistleblower basically flagging that transaction, and we've also heard from a CFO who said, you know, this was nothing but a deal that was, you know, meant to enrich then board chair Dutumini and his advisor Masocha Mgadi. So and the other issue is this fuel procurement, jet fuel procurement contract. So we're obviously expecting to hear evidence relating to that, and you know, some of the evidence has also been about board interference with regards to procurement decisions. So we can expect to hear, you know, more information relating to that, because each and every witness comes in with a different piece to, you know, the bigger picture, you know, and their perspective on what happened and what kind of board decisions were taken and how those affected operations at SAA. So we can expect that from this particular witness.
So it's all about, I guess, joining the dots and putting, as you said, these different pieces together. What have we learned so far? What sort of picture is being painted?
Well, the sort of picture that's been painted is about, especially with SAA, is about, you know, board interference, you know, contract irregularities, a 49.9 million rand, rather, is it million? Yes, it is 49.9 million rand cancellation fee that was due to a certain transaction advisor, which had their contract expanded irregularly without the involvement of the Department of Public Enterprises and so on. So that's what we've generally heard about, you know, very questionable decisions that have been taken by the board, and how, you know, money was siphoned as a result of those questionable decisions made by the board and so on. So we're just going to hear more relating to that.
So that's the aviation stream of evidence being led today. When are we expecting it to end? In a couple of weeks' time?
No, not necessarily. So I think we should be done with the aviation leg this week, or latest on Monday, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's what we've heard from evidence leader advocate Kate Hofmeyer. She basically told the chair that, you know, we're drawing to the end of this aviation leg.
So today should be interesting. Also, the commission also got confirmation with regards to, had some communication with former President Jacob Zuma's lawyers. We understand he will appear at the commission next month in July. But what are some of the concerns raised by his lawyers?
Okay, so the decision basically for former President Jacob Zuma to appear before the commission has somewhat overtaken yesterday's evidence, because I think most reports centered around him confirming that he will be appearing before the commission, and basically we saw a media release that was released by the commission, basically explaining to South Africans that they have received the letter and they confirm receiving the letter from the former president's lawyers. Now, obviously, there has been a narrative from the letter that basically explains that the commission is prejudiced against the former president, and so those are some of the sentiments that came from the letter that was written by former President Jacob Zuma's lawyers.
Reportedly, they wanted questions in advance. Is that correct?
Yes, they reportedly wanted questions, but we've seen another press release from the commission basically explaining that he is not obliged or obligated to get questions from the commission. And I think I was on Twitter yesterday and I happened to run across the questions. So basically, with regards to the rules, it's almost as though the rules are just saying that if you are implicated, according to the rules, implicated parties have to be informed beforehand that they have been implicated in a particular witness's testimony. And if need be, they would need to come in and appear. They don't necessarily have to. But if there are questions that the chair would then have, they would then have to answer those questions in the form of an affidavit or a statement that is written to the commission and giving basically their account of the events that unfolded, or how they see the events that unfolded relating to how they were implicated. But it does not necessarily necessarily mean that every witness that comes in is furnished with questions beforehand. It really does not. It has nothing to do with being furnished with questions beforehand.
All right. Interesting developments. Thank you very much indeed for your reporting. As always, that was SABC news reporter Mbalenhle Mthethwa talking to us about today's inquiry, state capture inquiry happening in Parktown, Johannesburg at 10 o'clock.